to the web of conspiracy. Here is your host, Adam Webb.
Hello, and welcome to another exciting edition of the Web of Conspiracy. I am your host, Adam Webb. It is great to be back with you again this week. It's been a couple weeks, so it's great to be back. Had a lot going on the last couple weeks, so it's good to kind of get back into the groove of doing things, at least what I'm used to doing. So thank you for everybody who keeps hanging in there and keeps supporting the show. Just a little update. I know that during my last show, I had a pending medical follow-up appointment with this ongoing treatment of melanoma that I had diagnosed with back in late summer of last year. I got some very good news. After another checkup, it appears that, at least in the general area where I'd had all the other procedures, that no other procedures are deemed necessary at this time. Matter of fact, it appears almost as if though the pigmentation in the area is actually lessening. So that's a good thing. It's actually a really good sign. So hopefully that this will be it for me. Now I'll have to continue to have regular screenings, and I'll have to continue to have my blood work monitored just to be on the safe side. But with any luck, hopefully this was it for me. So that being said, the month of May, and I don't know whether or not I really got into it a whole lot in my last show, but the month of May is Melanoma Awareness Month. And I've been as open about my experience as I can to be able to raise awareness to melanoma. Being a relatively young person, I was rather surprised to have the diagnosis. Now, yes, I'm fair-skinned, so yes, I'm at a greater risk, but nevertheless, certainly didn't expect it. There's a lot of people that don't really have a good understanding of skin cancer, whether it's basal cell, squamous cell, melanoma. There's different varieties. Melanoma is the most deadliest, and it's one that can spread throughout the other organs of the body. So that one is one that needs to be monitored very carefully for, and certainly needs to be treated as early as possible. I was fortunate enough to catch mine at stage 1, so with any luck, hopefully that'll be it for me. But nevertheless, it's important that I remain vigilant and almost have to live the life of a vampire, but actually I'm just kidding. I can go out. I just have to make sure that I protect my skin with sunscreen, clothing, that type of thing. Just have to be smart about it. It's the thing that I guess I would want to impart in terms of melanoma and skin cancer is that skin cancer is the most common form of cancer in the United States. It is a growing problem in other parts of the world, Australia as well as Great Britain. The rise of tanning beds was, of course, really spurred this. Anybody can get melanoma. Anybody can get skin cancer, regardless of how dark you are. And there is no such thing as a base tan. That is a myth. Anybody can get skin cancer. Now, I'm not advocating that everybody goes out there and avoids the sun, but what I would recommend is that people be smart about it. I know there's a lot of people who are very, challenge the idea of climate change, and I understand that. But what I would say is that there's enough cause of alarm between the use of tanning beds and perhaps increased ultraviolet radiation coming towards the sun, coming from the sun, that perhaps we need to be a little more vigilant now in terms of respecting what can happen from the sun's rays than maybe what we were 50 years ago. This is something I've been telling everybody. Look, if Bob Marley can die of melanoma, you can too. So it's important that everybody, regardless, checks your skin. And those who are of higher risk, red-haired people, fair-skinned, blonde-haired people, fair-skinned people, light eyes, you're the higher risk candidates. You should be screening regularly. Mine was caught because of a regular yearly examination. Mine was caught at stage 1. Had I not been having those regular examinations, given the relative nature, given that I was on the cusp of beginning to have lymphocytes in the area, that would have been a big problem in terms of metastasis, in terms of the cancer spreading. So I really urge everybody to be proactive. Examine your skin. Look for changes. Look for changes in moles. Anything that looks different. Any bleeding, any type of it bleeding from a mole, anything that's odd, get it checked out as soon as you possibly can. Don't hesitate. But it's been quite a journey for me the last 9 months now, I believe, or so. So I would just urge everybody to be vigilant and be cautious. And the best thing that you can do in terms of skin cancer is to prevent it. It is one of the most preventable forms of cancer. So by all means, it's okay to be a little pale, people. If you're pale, it's okay. It's not the end of the world. Cancer, though, it might be the end of your world. So use a sunscreen. Don't be afraid. Okay. After having said that, a few things that I'm going to continue on going forward this month, where this is basically the conspiracy theory month here on the Web of Conspiracy. Next week's show, I'm going to be looking at the media misinformation, media mind control efforts, all those kinds of things. So I'm going to discuss conspiracies surrounding the media. And then in the final week of the month of May, I'm going to go back to revisit something I discussed a year ago at this time on the old show, and that is the Bilderberg Group. So we're going to go back to and revisit the Bilderberg Group, of course, and I haven't gotten specific dates yet, but I do know that Bilderberg was planning to meet at the end of May. They meet every month, May, but in terms of which weekend, I'm not sure. Nevertheless, the last Friday of May, I'll be discussing Bilderberg. And then in June, don't worry, I'll get back to some of the more paranormal stuff, the UFO stuff, the alien stuff. I'll get back into that. Don't worry about that. I've got a really couple cool shows. One really cool show that I'm excited about in June that come the end of the month, I'll discuss in greater detail. So, okay. A couple news items I want to touch on. I know I've gotten a little bit of feedback on discussing the situation with the Ukraine and Russia, and I'm going to continue to monitor that. And I know that I had spoken about some information that I had received, given individuals that I know about some of the situation occurring in the former Soviet republics. Once again, tensions are still high. That hasn't changed, and continue to monitor that, and once I have any other emerging news, certainly I will be discussing that in greater detail. Here's what I can tell you. Of course, almost 2 weeks ago now, the parts of the Ukraine had voted on these bogus referendums to separate, and Russia was sort of, hey, we're not supporting this, we're not trying to annex this part of the Ukraine, and trying to play very cool with this. Now, what I will say is that what we're looking at here, at least what I believe, what we're looking at here, is that this is, first off, a very legitimate concern, legitimate fear for those former republics of what Russia is doing. They definitely appear to be moving in this direction of this new Soviet republic type. I'm not sure if that's what they would call it, but they're certainly hearkening back to those days. And Putin is definitely working his best to head that direction. Russia is playing this very carefully with the rest of Ukraine. Now, they were very aggressive with the Crimea. They're going to play this a little bit more carefully with the Ukraine. To me, this looks like an effort to really just destabilize the Ukraine. Now, let me explain this in greater detail why I believe that Russia is doing this. First off, Russia is threatening to cut off the supply of gas to the Ukraine if they're not paid money in advance. Now, they're putting a lot of pressure on a nation that is basically almost really in the midst of a civil war. You have parts of your country leaving for other countries, you have other parts claiming they're independent, and Russia is trying to squeeze the Ukraine out of every last penny in advance for gas paid. Now, of course, that some would argue, well, they're concerned about whether they would receive payment in the event something collapses, and certainly that could be argued, but I believe that this is also being used as a way of leveraging the Ukraine. And not only that, but by being very subtle in what they're saying in terms of the rest of these separatist movements. I have every reason to believe that Russia is just really trying to destabilize the Ukraine for the long game, okay? For those of you who are Game of Thrones fans, watching the show or you read the books, I liken what Putin's doing to what Littlefinger in the books and in the movie is doing, playing this long game of carefully planning out how he's going to one by one regain control of some of these former areas. And the Ukraine is one of the higher priorities on this list for a number of reasons. Certainly some natural resources are involved, but I believe that really the effort here is, okay, we're getting a lot of pressure from the international community for the way that we handled taking the Crimea. So now we're going to play it cool. We're going to lay back a little bit. We're just going to work behind the scenes and create instability in the area. We're just going to kind of weaken things a little bit, make it a little more, and then when the time is right, when we're careful, when things are just completely out of control, when we can truly justify our merging into the Ukraine, are going in and taking the rest of the Ukraine, it'll be for what we can at least try to attempt to sell to the international community as valid, as reasonable, as a threat to our interests, as a threat to our security, as a threat to the Russian people there, okay? For the same reasons that they wanted the Crimea, the ethnic Russians. I think that we're going to be looking at a very carefully plotted use of ethnicity going forward, as well as a very careful plan to just destabilize every portion of that government. I know there's been some effort, there's been some minor battles of some loyalists retaking some territory that had declared itself independent. It's a mess in the Ukraine. And of course, a number of other nations, as I had mentioned in my last broadcast, are equally as concerned about this type of situation unfolding in their territories as well. Azerbaijan is absolutely convinced that Russia will come to try to take their nation. Whether that's irrational fear, I guess it remains to be seen. But at this point, to me, it would seem to be a very rational concern on the part of Azerbaijan, and as well as some of the other former Soviet republics. So I will continue to monitor that, and when I have more information to pass down in terms of what knowledge I may receive going forward, I will do so as much as possible. Now, one other story I want to touch on, and this is just a crazy video out there. These wildfires that are just raging throughout Southern California, tremendous destruction and damage, and they're spawning what many people are referring to as these fire-nados that look like this swirling tornado of fire. Very scary, kind of creepy stuff, very apocalyptic, Armageddon type of looking stuff. There's a few of those videos getting loaded up on YouTube. If you have some downtime, looking just chill, kill some time, check some of those YouTube videos out. It's crazy. I mean, people get very close to these fires, and it is very dangerous type of stuff, but it is very impressive to see the kind of destruction that fire can do, and just how widespread the damage is occurring there. It's very this looks like something out of a sci-fi movie, or something sort of along the lines of Day After Tomorrow, that kind of thing. But very, very impressive video, and very scary type of situation. And I'm not sure if they're really going to be able to contain this anytime soon, at least from what I'm hearing. But we continue to monitor that, and of course send our thoughts and prayers out to the people in Southern California who are dealing with that, as well as look, there's a number of crises going on in the world at any given moment, and I try to touch on a few as much as I can. But certainly the situation in Nigeria, there's issues throughout the world there where injustices and tragedies, both of human origin and natural origin, that are occurring at any given moment. And I try to touch on as many of these as I possibly can, but just some pretty intense situations occurring around the world right now, and I will continue to monitor this as much as possible. Today's topic, okay, and this is one that it will probably upset a few people. It might offend a few others, but if you're listening to the show at this point, well then, you know that I'm not necessarily going to be completely afraid to touch on subjects, even though they may be a little more sensitive. That being said, I'm not necessarily advocating one way or another on some of these issues, and I'll express my personal opinions as I continue along with some of these examples that I'm going to discuss. But today's show is about false flags. Now, some of you are going to be very familiar with the term of false flags. There's a few conspiracy theorist, radio shows out there. One real big one out there, who is a little loud for me at times, but nevertheless, there's quite a few people out there who are trumpeting the conspiracy theory horn all the time at everything. And while I'm not always the first to jump onto all conspiracy theories, there are some that certainly gather my attention more than others. And the false flag conspiracies are, to me, some of the most interesting. And as I go further along, I'll explain to you why that is. So for those of you who aren't familiar, with the term, a false flag, what does this mean? Well, basically, a false flag it's a plot that is designed by a government to commit an act of violence and blame it on another group or government for its own purposes. The term really originates back to the sailing days, when we had a lot of naval battles, and of course the days of the heyday of the pirates, where these vessels would have to sail very close to one another to be able to attack each other. And what these other vessels do, an attacking vessel would raise the enemy's flag, pretending to be a friendly. And then before it engaged, because the rules of engagement were they had to fly the enemy flag. This was sort of this, some were more formal than others, but at any rate, they would have to raise their enemy flag to get close, and then before they attacked, they would drop their enemy flag and raise their own, and then they could fire. The key was getting close enough so that the cannon fire and some of the other musket fire could reach the other ship. So it was important that you get close enough, and by flying the false flag, you could get close enough before you would attack to create this to close the distance, so to speak. And so that's really the origination of the term false flag, where it came from. But these types of false flag attacks have been occurring for ages. Now, for me, in my opinion, I'm of the belief that false flag attacks, false flags, are really the true father of conspiracy and the father of conspiracy theories. This is by most accounts, some of the oldest sort of conspiracy theory out there. And it is of my belief that because of the truth that has been found in numerous false flag attacks, that the conspiracy theorists, the conspiracy theories, the whole field, the whole genre is a byproduct of false flags. Now, there is a considerable amount of these types of actions that have occurred throughout history and even into modern history. One of the earliest discussions of what you would describe as a false flag was the Great Fire of Rome in 64 AD. The Emperor Nero, the Mad Emperor, who was playing his fiddle as the people burned. He wanted this massive revitalization project built in the city. In order to do that in Rome, he needed to have a whole bunch of stuff cleared out, demolished. He needed basically to take control of some land. The Senate, because keep in mind Rome at this point was a republic, the Senate essentially said, well, we're not allowing this. And Nero said, well, okay, if you won't allow it and you're not going to vote for it, well, then I'll take matters in my own hands. And he ordered the city to burn. And that way, he was able to have this space for this revitalization project. But the kicker in this was that Nero didn't necessarily take responsibility for these fires on his own. He blamed the Christians for the fires. Okay? Someone who was a threat to Roman rule certainly threatened Roman gods. So the idea of Christianity being this enemy that Nero needed to squash, it worked out very well in terms of trying to first get his way in terms of having the space for this project, but then also pitch the blame onto somebody who was an outside threat to the stability of Rome. So it made perfect sense for him to blame the Christians to do what he wanted. So that is one of the earliest known false flag events. Now, there's a number of other false flag events, and I'm not going to be able to get through all of them here, but I want to touch on a few that are some of the most interesting. The start of the Spanish-American War in the 1890s, it basically started when the USS Maine off the coast of Cuba exploded and was sunk, and President McKinley at the time blamed the Spanish, who had controlled Cuba, blamed the Spanish for this. So McKinley then blamed the Spanish, and we went into war. And as it turned out, it's believed by most historians that it was actually a U.S. mine in the water that caused the explosion. It was our own mine that blew up the USS Maine. So there's, right there, a prime example of the United States government using, and whether this was by accident or on purpose, that remains a question. But using this explosion as a way of tagging it onto somebody else for your own purposes. We wanted to take Cuba away from Spain because we had a lot of financial interests in there. Sugar, tobacco, iron. There was a number of financial interests in Cuba. So we wanted to make sure that Spain would not prevent us from having these things. And as a result, we had sent these ships there to patrol, to protect our interests. And we had made even attempts to try to annex, but Congress forbid us annexing Cuba. How interesting and how different things may have gone had that happened. What a series of what-ifs a mile long there. Nevertheless, Cuba remained at that point independent. One of the more interesting ones, I think, comes from World War I. There are a number of historians that now believe that the sinking of the Lusitania by Germany, that started World War I, at least in terms for the United States, that brought us into the war, was a false flag. Now, that the key in this is that the German embassy placed a number of ads in American newspapers saying, look, you need to stay out of the waters in this part near British Isles, and I don't remember exactly how it's worded, but made very clear that we should not send any of our vessels into that waters. They may be fired upon and sunk. Okay, they would be seen as enemy vessels. So it was made very clear that we should not send any ships there. Now, of course we did, and 2,000 people died. At least that's how the report goes. Now, the interesting thing is that in 2008, some divers went and explored the wreckage of the Lusitania. They happened to find millions of rounds of ammunition, okay? And this ammo was marked in crates that were disguised as like food crates, different type of food products. So in other words, this Lusitania was bringing in ammunition disguised as food supplies to Britain. This was an obvious attempt to aid Great Britain. Now, the question that some have is, well, did 2,000 people really die on there? Were there that many there? Was this really just an effort to supply militarily to Great Britain? And there was a number of questions that go along with that. However, the official count still says 2,000 people died there. Now, what makes this even more interesting is that in terms of United States industry, of course, at this time, we're talking about the heyday of the Carnegies and all these the bastions, the barons of American industry basically at its peak. So here we are with all of these tycoons. They've invested heavily in the war efforts in Great Britain and in France. And certainly 4 million rounds of ammunition going to Britain makes it very clear that somebody was investing quite a bit in Great Britain. And Germany was winning the war. Germany was winning the war pretty handily for the most part. Now, these American businesses were terrified that if Germany were to take over, they would not take on the debts of France and Great Britain. These huge industries would be out millions of dollars owed to them by these foreign nations. Germany would not make due on their war debts, not on Great Britain's war debts or France's war debts. They just wouldn't get paid. So the story goes that these tycoons, these leaders of these great businesses went to President Wilson's office. Because keep in mind, President Wilson was a pacifist. He was a historian, really the father of public administration, a very bright guy, but he was a pacifist in that he really was trying very hard to keep the United States out of the First World War, and he ran on the campaign that he would. However, shortly after receiving this visit, all of a sudden the United States is in World War I, and it's believed that it's because of this this false flag event was an effort to drum up support from the people, to say, okay, this is why we have to go to war. They've killed 2,000 of our people. There was American citizens on board. We cannot let this stand. And we wound up getting into the war, and of course, Great Britain and France prevailed. Germany was defeated, and the war debts were paid. Okay. The next, and this is another one that is certainly very verifiable historically, is the burning of the Reichstag in Germany in 1933. This is the German parliament, the Reichstag. The Nazis had set fire to this parliament, and Hitler, basically being this rising leader of the Nazi party, said, look, okay, there's some kind of terrorist activity going on here. We have to put all these restrictions. We have to restrict the press. We have to restrict when people can go out. We have to basically control everything people do because we have terrorists. We don't know what they're going to do. The Nazis used this fear of this burning of the Reichstag to pin it on the enemies, pin it on the Jews, pin it on these leftist forces, the communists, the socialists. They're the ones responsible for the burning of the Reichstag. So he was able to place all these restrictions around, dissolve the parliament, and then raise the Nazi party as the supreme leaders of Germany. And of course, the rest is history. But the Nazis were in fact the ones who burnt the Reichstag in an effort to pin it all back on the enemies and then seize control for themselves. As I said, there's a number of other examples. Certainly, I know there's many who talk about the Gulf of Tonkin, the Vietnam War. There's a number of reasons, of things that have occurred historically to say, okay, perhaps there really is something to these false flag events, that there's something going on here. Okay, because there's certainly enough historical documentation that to show that they have happened, that we have been misinformed, that we have been steered into particular directions for what was believed by the powers that be at the time to be the best situation, the best way to go. So that brings us to some of the more modern-day false flag theories that are out there. Perhaps one of the biggest is the September 11th terrorist attacks, that many believe, okay, this was actually perpetrated by our own government in an effort to create this Patriot Act to restrict our freedoms. And I'll be the first to tell you that I don't know how I feel about this, and I'm very suspicious of this being a false flag event. However, I know many people are certainly sold on it. So for those who have lost a loved one in the World Trade Center, I mean no offense, but I certainly want to bring this up because there are a number of people out there who certainly believe that this is the case. As I state, I'm not sure. I don't know. There certainly seems to be some compelling possibilities out there that perhaps something more was going on, and I don't deny that. But nevertheless, I'm not sure if we'll ever know the truth there. Another well-known, at least a more modern, well-known false flag theory was the U.S. invasion of Iraq. Now, this came, of course, on the heels of the September 11th terrorist attack, and it was launched because there was this idea that, well, Iraq possessed weapons of mass destruction, which, upon invasion, upon defeat, we've never found these weapons. Now, I know there's a number of people who say, okay, well, these weapons actually were moved somewhere else, they were moved to Iran, or whatever the case may be. There's a number of people who question, okay, well, perhaps it was still true, and there was still plenty of reason to still be there. But there are others who think, look, this is just another reason for us to go back into Iraq, to put in place a government that we want, and to protect our interests in Iraq once again. Perhaps that, in fact, is what happened. Once again, I'm not 100% certain on this one either. And more recent, the next two are even really more recent, that are often thrown out there as potential false flag events. And one of those is now the Boston Marathon, which happened a little over a year ago, the Boston Marathon bombing. There are many conspiracy theorists who believe that this was a false flag to inspire the loss of further liberty, the idea that we would try to crush more freedoms, that we would really try to okay, well, just in the same way that Hitler used the burning of the Reichstag to gain greater control over his people. That's what some other conspiracy theorists are arguing here, is that this is really an attempt to take further control of the people. And this is spurred by this. There's this video of this strange man watching from the rooftops, watching as if he's monitoring a situation to see what's happening. No one really knows the truth about this. I know there's some speculation out there. There's some that are claiming that the brother who was supposedly killed was actually not killed, but taken into custody. Certainly the two suspects, their mother, of course, claimed that they were framed, and of course you would expect, perhaps, that a mother would come to their children's defense, but nevertheless, many conspiracy theorists look at this and say, look, well, okay, this is really just, these guys are patsies, right? These guys are just, they're the ones that are the fall guys. This is really just a homegrown type of event, which I would certainly hope is not the case. But nevertheless, once again, here we are with another scenario where many believe that this was not just an act of terrorism, that this was created and spurred by our own government. I'm skeptical of this one as well. This one certainly has me a little suspicious as to whether or not that is the case. The one that makes me think a little bit more, and before you all send me a bunch of hate mail and jump down my throat, allow me to explain myself. The one that really makes me suspicious are the Sandy Hook shootings. Now, I understand, look, Sandy Hook is one thing that really it really fires people up because kids were killed. And whenever you have the loss of life of a child, that tends to really fire up individuals. Now, as I've stated, many believe that this is a false flag, an attempt to spur gun control, to take guns out of the hands of the people. There's theories that actors were hired playing these roles, that in fact none of these people actually existed, that this school was a shut-down school, that it was not in operation at the time. And to make matters more confusing, there's documentation that the government was actually having a planned exercise in the area before this actually happened. And one of the other more interesting caveats to this theory is that, well, there were these support websites, in raising support and money for the Sandy Hook victims that appeared, and they appeared before the actual incident occurred, a day or two before in some cases, which is of certainly great suspicion. Why would that have happened? And another, to me, I think the thing that really grabs my attention with the Sandy Hook incident, okay, the thing that makes me the most suspicious, and I think that really grabs a lot of people's attention, and I don't remember the gentleman's name, but one of the fathers of a child who was supposedly killed in Sandy Hook was speaking with the media, and before they went live and on camera, there's all these candid shots of him laughing, smiling. Looks like he's having a great time. Now, I understand that people grieve in different ways, but I have to tell you that in no way am I smiling or laughing under any circumstance within hours, or within a day, or with 2 days, 3 days of my child being killed by a gunman in school. There's nothing to laugh or smile about there for days. Nothing. To me, that is some of the most suspicious activity of all. And then, of course, the further claims here is that he is an actor. And there are these stories that point to him being this particular gentleman from Texas who's an actor and a musician, and he certainly seems to look like him. He certainly seems to match the criteria. There's a number of different factors involved, and I could probably do an entire show on the Sandy Hook conspiracy. But nevertheless, this one here, that particular father, look, I've lost loved ones. I've lost a parent. I've lost lots of people in my life that I cared a great deal about. And I can imagine losing a child. Furthermore, I cannot imagine laughing and smiling within 24 hours of that child being murdered. Under no circumstances is that funny. Am I having a good time? I really don't know what kind of asshole would. But I digress. People do grieve differently. I just don't see this. I don't see this being the case. I remember as a young child in the United States the story of John Walsh. And for those of you in the States, you're familiar with the show America's Most Wanted, hosted by John Walsh. His son Adam was abducted, eventually murdered. They found out he was murdered, but at no point did he ever walk around smiling, laughing. And this went on for weeks. It destroyed him, and it turned him into this crusader who wound up creating the show and creating a foundation to try to prevent this kind of thing from happening. What I do know is that as a father, there is no way, as a parent, that you are having that good of a time with the media, unless there is something seriously wrong with you, or you are just faking it. I don't know which it is. But to me, that is one of the more glaring smoking guns in this whole thing. Of course, the other issues involved, there's dozens of them. Conflicting media reports throughout that entire day. I watched the entire thing unfold. Nobody knew what the hell was going on. It was a complete mess. I don't buy into this. I believe that there is something suspicious about the Sandy Hook incident. I don't believe we've received all the knowledge and the information about that. And I don't know that we ever will. Maybe one day we will, I don't know. But of all of the incidents that I'm the most skeptical of being what we've been told it is, it's the Sandy Hook shootings. Something is not right there. And perhaps it's just a mentally ill parent who was certainly well enough within a 24-hour period to start laughing it up, having a good old time, enjoying the limelight. Sorry, that's not a circumstance to enjoy the limelight under. Not at all. So, what we have here with false flags. Look, they resonate with people. The false flag events, they resonate. The reason being is because they've happened. They've been perpetrated dozens of times that we know of, for sure. Certainly maybe more. For all the theories that we have about the ones that may be, I don't know. I can't definitively answer on all those. But what I do know is that there's an extensive history involving false flag events to show that governments across the world have done it. The United States has been party to it. Europe, everywhere, has engaged in these types of activities. So, when we're looking at these recent issues in the last 10, 15 years, we look at the September 11, 2001 terrorist attacks, we look at the United States invasion of Iraq over weapons of mass destruction, we look at the Sandy Hook shootings, when we look at the Boston Marathon bombing, of course we become suspicious anymore. When we look at the decline of personal freedom and liberty in the United States and throughout most of the West in the last 15 years, I think we should be concerned. We should be very concerned that perhaps, maybe, there is a false flag event happening. I don't know. I don't have all the answers. But what I do know is that we have to continue to question. And yes, that's going to offend some people. Certainly. We can't make everybody happy. But what I do know is that if we continue to buy into these things, we're going to, without question, at least some of these activities and some of these events, we're going to have a greater loss of personal freedom. It's inevitable. And the question that we have to ask ourselves is, how much are we willing to lose for our security? Where's the fine line that we draw? I don't know. There's no easy answers. And I don't even pretend to make those answers for you. I want to present you the information and you make your own judgment calls. It's your judgment to make. I would just hope that that we continue to not blindly question or not blindly accept what our governments tell us without question. Because there is enough documented history to prove that our governments will lie to us for their own purposes at a drop of a hat. We cannot accept it at face value anymore. It is ours to question. It is ours to demand the truth for. So, okay. Well, that's what I have for you this week. Just a reminder, next week, I'm going to talk about media misinformation and mind control efforts. And then the following week, I'm going to wrap up Conspiracy Month with the Bilderberg Group. Once again, I just want to thank everybody for continuing to support the show. It's awesome. Thank you very much. Thank you for the feedback. And I know there's been some technical issues between the YouTube channel, and I know there's some issues with downloads this week. Everything should be ironed out now. If you have any issues, please let me know. webofconspiracy@gmail.com. If you have any show ideas, questions, anything you just want to chat, drop me an email at webofconspiracy@gmail.com. Also check out, of course, the show's YouTube page, the show's social media pages, Facebook, Twitter, Google+. I try to get involved and active on there. I haven't been so much the last couple weeks, but I've been really busy. I apologize for that. However, I'll be looking to get more involved here the next few weeks going forward, have a little bit more time on my hands to be able to work more with that. So feel free to check out and follow the show on those pages. I like to post updates on there as well. Okay. Well, just once again, thank you everybody for listening, and I'll be back with you again next week.